Good morning, School of Tomorrow students. Today I want to talk about what makes people crazy about synergetics. I mean that what about synergetics drives them crazy? Let's put it that way. Crazy is one of those words where if I'm crazy about something, that means I really love it greatly. It's like I'm crazy about it, but it drives me crazy or makes me crazy or it's crazy making. That's more of a put down, like a warning. So I think synergetics is sometimes seen as an attempt to popularize physics, and because it was written quite a while ago, it can't any longer be that relevant because physics has moved on really quickly. And anyway, if you look in the index, which is there's no mention of Schrodinger's equation or there's nothing really about quantum mechanics. It doesn't seem to have Pauli exclusion principle. It's like, where's all that MIT chemistry? Where's Linus Pauling? He doesn't mention Linus Pauling. And that's because I would argue synergetics is indeed a very finite work, and this guy has kind of disassociated himself fairly explicitly from everything mainstream, and I want to prove that here. I want to take on also those who say, hey, you can't just extend New England or American transcendentalism to the 21st century. No one said you could do that. It's already been tied off. And I think that's valid to say. I just also wanted to say if we are into something American, as the Emersonians were, it's kind of a slap in their face to tie off the lineage prematurely. Here we have Margaret Fuller's grandnephew writing something like this. It's very transcendentalist. Why would we close the door on transcendentalism being still a lineage in the American literature um, repo? You could call it. I would say repo in the get sense. And here, this paragraph, he's being autobiographical. It's talking about going to Harvard. And it's like, hey, if you're good at math, that's pretty objective. They know you got the right answer or not. Whereas in the humanities, it seems like they talk about how good your handwriting is. Like he couldn't get his head around the humanities as much, and he had all A's in math and sciences when he goes to Harvard, but decides to really dive into the humanities. He mentions German literature here, musical composition, art appreciation. In other words, I'm going to take all, oh, and then there's chemistry he tacks on at the end. And then, but I'm always still good at math, and my spontaneous exploration of mathematics continued after I left Harvard. In other words, he's going to keep sticking to his kind of self invented mathy language here. He's going to keep developing this sort of unique way of thinking. You hear about his independent mathematical explorations, and then what I consider really important section is remoteness of the synergetics vocabulary. He's also told us way at the top of this section that in school he's always being blamed. Is that here actually? Yeah, he's always being disciplined, whether it was my thick eyeglasses or lack of personable favors or some other psychological factors. I often found myself to be the number one anti favorite amongst my school teachers and pupils. Now that's funny, right? Just the whole sentence, the anti favorite especially. Um, okay, 1 mark or 2 marks or 3 marks for Fuller. Each mark was a 15-minute penalty period to be served after the school had been let out for the others. So he's getting detention a lot. And it was a sport amongst some of my classmates to arrange through projectiles or other inventions to have noises occur in my vicinity. So he's sketching for us in his newfangled funny language, kind of a Rockwell. They teased me a lot. Um, Profile here. And then he's talking about the unfairness of the humanities in a way. He's kind of a victim. And then he's still, but he's always been good at math. And then he gets to go to Annapolis. This is a big thing. He puts education in quotes because he completed his formally acknowledged education. He's going to be a maverick. Now I'm going to skip to remoteness of synergetics vocabulary, where he basically confesses that he's been in a lifelong tug of war over all the words, right? It's like the semantics of all other sciences. For many years, my vocabulary was utterly foreign to the semantics of all other sciences. Now I'm going to jump to the Synergetics Dictionary here, and he's talking about gravity here. So the thing is, I've been building this picture where we're incorporating synergetics into a branch of American philosophy through its literature, but it's literature slash philosophy. I know Harold Bloom thinks that Emerson was not a philosopher. He was a writer of wisdom literature. So there's fine points and distinctions we can all make around what's what here. Like, is it self-help or what? Is that philosophy? Can philosophy ever be self-help? What is philosophy? What is synergetics? So here's gravity he's talking about. Holistic gravity has no frequency. Gravity is integral. We've already established that the word frequency is kind of up for grabs as to what it all means. But it basically, well, let's keep going. The physicists, so in other words, not me, because he's describing, the physicists tend to describe gravity as a weak force because they don't recognize that it's a big arc effect in contradistinction to little pockets of energy like an Earth or star. Now, his gravity is going to be tensile strength, and it's going to drive you wild to read those passages because he's like out there on his suspension bridge. They're like building Golden Gate or something with more and more tensile strength. And it's like, well, look at what nature's already doing. You look up at the moon, we're tethered to the moon invisibly by like a tension cable, and you can put your hand through it, and it's like you can't, it's not the shape of space Einsteinian picture of gravity. It's an infinitely tense, infinitely thin, and to the point of doesn't exist, invisible tensile cord between the planets and the cosmic bodies are tethered in this way. But then he makes a huge deal about when you are tethered and in a sort of 180 turns to 90 degree relationship, by which he means you go from driving by something to turning into the driveway. You go from passing by versus immersion in. You're going to dive in. You're going to become part of, in some sense. That's the falling in, and like sort of gravity where you're falling in towards something. He's real into that, and Newton and Galileo and Kepler. Like, he does not want to be cut loose from these other great thinkers who have done a lot of work around gravity, right? So it's one thing to say he's got a literary meaning, his own meaning for gravity in play here, where he's dipping his brush very deeply, though, in established scientific knowledge around what gravity does actually mean. But then he's off in his own world, in his remote synergetics vocabulary, and so it's leaving us, the reader, kind of frustrated here. Electromagnetic radiant energy is entropic. Gravitational energy is syntropic. Like, can he get away with that? Is that something he can write as an equation? Does he want to cite an authority on that? So he's developing his language, how he wants us to think. In other words, the special case experiences that we have, events, he calls everything events, you could say. In another passage, he talks about that. So here we are. All of our events are like consistent with, in his mind, eternal principles, timeless principles, the laws of physics, you could say, but let's say the laws, or let's say the rules, or let's say the principles as he does. We're always like these special case flashes, these events, these happenings, this flow of energy through events is guided by, you could say, that what is it to follow physics? I mean, what is it to follow laws? That's not gravity. That's not what we mean by gravity. But our discovery of these laws and our ability to generalize them and to think in terms of them adds to the sense the world makes to us. So we're in a process of making sense of the world by thinking about science, and in what sense does the world make more sense? And Fuller's all about more with less, right? To the extent you are in discovery of the generalized principles, you're able to do well for yourself by doing more with less. You waste less, you get it, the principles. And so, outwardly, you're accomplishing something with less materials and energy than it used to take because now you understand even better what you're doing. The Hammerman, the importance here of mentioning that they're not thinking about what they're doing in these other terms, talks about how it's the Polish Hammermen who do it best and intuitively. He brings in a human player and their intuition, and I would argue that this is always almost in contrast to what he calls the 99% invisible world. In other words, as humans, he sees us as reflexively into what's solid, what's special case, what's right in front of our noses, what's sensorial. But what we really need to solve and think about and be like open to is invisibility and off the visible spectrum. And I think what he means by that too is a willingness to entertain thoughts that are not of a literal nature, but are nevertheless pregnant with principles, you could say. And synergetics is such a language. It doesn't try that hard as a science language would to stay literal. Like, oh, you're just talking about ropes, right? You're not talking about something metaphorical. It's like, no, I don't think he would give you that guarantee. Actually, even metaphorical is still linear, and he's trying to create sort of a tensegrity ball of linear special case events that cohere. And in what sense does it cohere? Synergetics or anything else, or your whole life story, what you're up to, what are you doing? And I just wanted to end with that what are you doing question. I think where we get to climate of invention, this is where I would again argue that we're dealing with the self-reliance meme that was popularized through American transcendentalism. Self-reliance and the integrity of the individual. And here he's saying, we're talking about patents, corporations, people vis-a-vis, and how he's taken out some patents, partly so he wouldn't be stopped, partly so he can take credit and prove his thesis that it's individuals who are the source of inventions. Let's see if I can find a perfect sentence. In the competitive world of money making, discoveries are looked upon as exploitable and monopolizable claims to be operated as private properties of big business. He's being critical of this throughout, right? He's like, that's how we think of it now, but basically he's saying towards the end, but it's not sustainable, right? It's like, I'm not playing that game, but except when in Rome. It's like I have to play that game. And again, I think this is manifest in his idea of being in a tug of war over all the words, right? He's developing his own language and inviting us in to see what he's got here. And in the humanities, that's not really considered a sinful thing to do. But in the sciences, it's much more problematic because there's more of an edifice mentality. We're building a cathedral together. It's not each man and woman in their booth, with their book. It's we're working on this together. So it looks like, non-magnetic bodies, but there are times when it's just like he doesn't seem to see the difference or care about the difference between electromagnetic chemical bonding in interattraction versus mass interattraction with no electronic phenomena involved. He seems to not care about that that's a difference. Gravity has no shadow. Gravity is uninterferable. Radiation is interferable. Gravity is omnidirectional. Mass interattraction, which, as Newton discovered, is directly interproportional, etc., etc. Okay, so it's all his brushes all dipped in Newton and stuff. Gravity seems so vertical. Here it's almost back to blending, right? Poetry. But we know that in actual fact, you and I are interacted because gravity is so big. We don't realize it. We know that in actuality radii converge. We do not realize that you and I are interattracted because gravity is so big. The attraction is there, but it seems so minor we dismiss it as something we call aesthetics or love affair. Now, given how this works in other passages, given how he's comes back to this trope, I would say he's also playing with, your relationship to him. He's the reader, you're the reader. It's the reader-writer relationship sometimes that he's talking about. What is the gravity? What is there gravity? That coheres you and I, atemporally, asynchronously, all that kind of stuff. And I think in synergetics, that's not something you still have traction in synergetics to think about those things, as the language was designed to serve in the humanities, but not to cut ties with the sciences, but maybe be a little critical sometimes, and also critical of the culture. It's a very remote point of view, I have to say, but that makes it interesting. Talk to you soon.